The Cosmic Briefing, hosted by award-winning author Dr. Allison Brown, opens the door to disclosure, consciousness, galactic history, and humanity's awakening.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Cosmic Briefing, where finally I have the opportunity to sit down and give you my thoughts on the Disclosure Day movie by Steven Spielberg. We saw this movie a couple of weeks ago. It's been out, probably 6 weeks now. And I'm finally having the time to sit down and talk about what I noticed in the movie. So let me say straight off the bat, I was a bit disappointed. I think my expectations were a little bit too high. Coming from the perspective of somebody who's very well versed in this field, communicated with extraterrestrials a number of times over the past 10 years, and having a lot of background information, I think I just had too high of expectations. However, I think generally then, for the public, it probably was a much better experience. I've heard mixed reviews, of course, and I want to go over some of those things that I've heard and why I think some of those reviews are valid. But for the public, I think there were a number of things that were brought out into the collective consciousness that were relevant and helpful and will be important as we move forward. The first of those is when Emily Blunt's character starts channeling. That's huge because it's validity for the channeling process, the way that these extraterrestrials communicate through our voice, communicate to us telepathically, and then we can communicate messages through our own voice via energy. That's a big deal to have been brought out into awareness, and particularly since she was doing the clicking and it wasn't coming out in English or some other human language. It was coming out in noises, essentially, which we refer to as light language. So I think that was a big deal, and I'm glad that that came out. One of the other things that I'm happy came out is that disclosure is about so much more than just UFOs and extraterrestrials. It's also about our gifts coming online. Now, if you notice, the two main characters, Emily Blunt, and forgive me, I don't remember the guy's name, but the two of them were representatives or liaisons, essentially, for the extraterrestrials to humanity. And as such, their gifts just unlocked at a certain period of time. I think for the guy, it was a little bit earlier. And then for Emily Blunt's character, it came on in adulthood. And they started being able to speak foreign languages. They were able to solve mathematical equations. They were able to read people's minds. They had telepathy and all of that sort of thing. And it just turned on spontaneously, seemingly, out of nowhere. That's a big deal because that is going to start happening to more and more people. So if that's happening to you, let me know in the comments. But it is going to start happening. It's happening to a lot of our clients that we see and just people randomly who are just normal, everyday people. All of a sudden, they either start channeling or they're able to communicate telepathically with their children or their spouse. Or they have other gifts that turn on mediumship, for example, and things like that. And that's what's going to happen as humanity ascends, which is essentially what's happening. It was also important, I think, that they are essentially saying then in this movie that disclosure is more about the reality of human existence, our internal divinity, our internal gifts, who we are as a species and what our history is, and what our history is relative to the extraterrestrials, what our relationship is to these beings. But one of the things that I don't want to be misperceived is this idea that there were just two chosen humans, because that isn't the case. First of all, we're not exactly chosen in that way. We do develop our own contract. I've talked about contracts before in an earlier podcast. This idea that we have a contract and we come in to have certain experiences or a certain mission or service to humanity. And so many people who identify as what we would call star seeds do feel like they are liaisons for the extraterrestrials, or have this special relationship with them, or are in communication with them, or observed by them. And this is where the idea of the abductions comes into play. And I want to say that I understand why experiencers, or abductees, as they call themselves, might be upset with this movie, because Spielberg does sort of make it seem as though it's okay, that there isn't really trauma, or that there shouldn't be trauma, or we shouldn't look at it as a traumatic event when communication takes place in that way, or interactions take place in that way. And I can understand why an abductee who doesn't have a greater awareness of contracts, for example, or their divinity, might feel that way. It is definitely traumatic. It's traumatic from the human experience. It can be, I should say. It's not always, but it can be. And for the boy in the case, because there was the boy and the girl when they were little, it was scary for him. And the girl, Emily Blunt's character, as a child, comforted him and helped him to get through that experience, even the second time when they revisited it as adults. And so I understand there's been some backlash by abductees or experiencers, making it seem that Spielberg doesn't take that seriously and trying to convince the public that it isn't traumatic. And I hear you. I get you. I think that's a valid complaint. There is a greater understanding of all of that, which is a bigger topic than I want to cover here. But yes, you're right. The other issue I think that some people have with this movie is the Christian aspect. And there definitely was a push by Spielberg to make Christians believe or understand, or to provide his perspective that the idea of extraterrestrials is not incompatible with the idea of extraterrestrial, or with the Christian church. So that extraterrestrials and the Christian church can coexist, and it wouldn't be against Christian tradition to believe in extraterrestrials. That was definitely an overarching message. It was very overt in the idea of one of the characters coming from a convent, having spent time in a convent, and calling her mother, what they call the head person in a convent, and asking her opinion about all of this. And she reassures the girl, yes, this is okay, all God's creatures and all of that. And I do agree with that, because I understand that this idea of extraterrestrials is even bigger than just UFOs and ETs and NHI. It's actually the divine perspective in which we all exist. And so it's greater than any one religion. It has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with our own spirituality and our connection with Source. So I understand where Steven Spielberg is coming from that. But if you are strong in your Christian faith, it might be a little bit, you might be repelled a little bit by that message. So I understand that, and I wanted to speak to that. But I also am thrilled that Steven Spielberg's overarching message for the whole thing is this idea of empathy, love, and compassion. It was evidenced by every nefarious individual in the movie coming in contact with Emily Blunt's character, or the other guy's character. Every time they came into relationship with them, or in their energetic field, there was this bubble of love, essentially, of consciousness that surrounded them, such that the nefarious person stopped thinking in that way for just a moment and started feeling this love. For example, the main character, the baddie, saw his wife superimposed over Emily Blunt's character. I guess I should have given a warning that there might be some revelations here that if you haven't seen the movie, you may not want to watch. At any rate, he saw his wife's face over her face, and so he was feeling that loving connection to his wife. He was being placed into this bubble of love and compassion and empathy, and he stopped doing the bad things, at least for that moment, right? And so this was the overarching goal of the movie, I think, was to make us understand that it is all about consciousness. It's all about coming together as one human race, and loving one another and seeing ourselves in one another, because that's where we're headed. Truly, that's where we're headed. Even if it doesn't seem that way on the ground level, our consciousness is expanding, it is ascending, and we are moving into that ascension space where our awareness is going to expand such that we do recognize our relationship with the extraterrestrials and recognize our place, humanity's place, in the greater galactic family. Following up with this message of love and compassion and empathy, and that's where we're headed, I think that's where a lot of people in the reviews that I saw walked away feeling heart-centered and heart-filled. Sometimes there were tears. They received that overarching message of love, and I think so overall it was a good movie in that respect. Let me know in the comments what you think about the movie. Again, I think there were more positives probably than negatives for me, but in terms of an extraterrestrial movie, I'm just not an action movie kind of gal. So all of the car chases and constant chasing, trying to catch them and evade, and the train scene and the car scenes and all of that kind of stuff, that's just not my cup of tea. But I think it served its purpose. Let me know what you think. And if you like what you're seeing on the Cosmic Briefing, please do subscribe, hit the thumbs up, and share. And feel free to join us in our school community where we can talk about these types of topics at will and receive heart-centered information and validation. See you next time. Thanks.